For a long time, I got to preach the gospel at the Grand Duke University Chapel, one of the great neo-Gothic churches of our land. For 20 years, every time I walked in that grand building, I marveled at that great tower looming before me. "Rabbi, what stones! What a magnificent, eternal-looking temple!" exclaimed the disciples. "Not a stone will be left on stone," Jesus replies. "This great building destroyed, wars, rumors of wars, nation against nation, earthquake, famine." This is Jesus' longest sermon in the Gospel of Mark. He speaks to the 12, letting the inner circle in on a somber, apocalyptic secret. This temple, appearing so eternal, shall end. Well, we're at the end of the church's year and the world's year. Frost and dry stubble along the roadside, summer green turning to fall russet, Melville's November of the soul, and Jesus talks cataclysmic ending. Now, contrary to what you may have been led to believe, when Jesus goes apocalyptic and talks of the end, he's not predicting the future. He's speaking of the precariousness of the present. This temple, this world, now, is not as stable and eternal as it may appear. Mainline, educated, respectable, liberal Christianity gets real nervous when Jesus talks apocalyptic. We prefer Jesus as the great moral teacher, the example of compassion for the poor, or someone who gives us a spiritual boost. Well, none of that here in Jesus' last will and testament on his way to his end. He speaks of our end. Jesus, before you leave, give us some final words of wisdom. Jesus replies, "God is going to kill everybody here. All this for any of its present glory, it's ending. Stone ripped from stone, your great monuments reduced to rubble." "I'm feeling kind of temporary," laments Death of a Salesman's Willimon. Must you be past 50 to know that feeling? Shiva is not only Hinduism's beneficent creator, but also disruptive destroyer. I kill, I make alive. But that's not a verse from the Upanishads. It's a boast by the one whom Jews and Christians worship. Ever heard a sermon on that text? What if our much beloved permanence, our big, heavy, eternal-looking buildings are delusion, illusion? There's a reason that most churches are built to look 600 years older than they really are. There's a reason why the pews are bolted down to the floor. Feeling kind of temporary, we come to church. We come to church as we come to the university to cure our precariousness. Speaking of the university, I had a conversation with an undergraduate whom I'd found in the Duke Chapel vestry, seeming to admire the portraits of past deans of the chapel. That is Dean James Cleland, I instructed, the most beloved of my predecessors. Odd, he replied, pointing to the brass label on the frame. "That says here that it's Frank Hickman." What? It was true. Some undergrad vandal had switched the labels. Maybe for years, people calling dead deans of the chapel by the wrong names. So when I left Duke Chapel, the president asked, "Will you be expecting us to pay for your portrait?" "Don't bother," I said. If having my portrait gained me even a moment of immortality, it would be worth the expense. but they got the wrong names on the portraits downstairs. No. When I'm dead, I'm really dead. Portrait or no portrait. Now, and I bet that those of you who are young, even you know this, even though most of you expect that you're a long way from the finitude that obviously faces me, you've learned that, say when you're in education, something is gained, there's growth, but something is also lost. To learn anything worth knowing requires relinquishment of what you once knew. Some of you experience college not as cheery progress, growth, and development, but rather as cataclysmic stone cast off stone, walls tumbling down, and what you thought you knew ripped off, destroyed by the new insight that you gain. In a graduate history seminar at Yale, C. Van Woodward told us, all American history written before 1960 is not only out of date, it's wrong. Vietnam, the Civil Rights Movement, disestablished what we once believed was established as our story. St. Paul hears God say to one of his urbane, sophisticated congregations, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and discard the intelligence of the intelligent. God is not only Alpha, but God is also Omega. From what I've seen as a pastor, there's no arrival of God without some sort of departure. There's no grasping of faith without relinquishment. In every move toward God, something is gained, but something is also lost, and that loss can be painful. That's one of the reasons I enjoy teaching now in a divinity school. Most of our students have had to leave something of value in order to be preparing for ministry. I remember before a class I asked, hey, how did you get to Duke Divinity? And she responded, well, God called me and made me walk off a good paying job. And my husband said, hey, that wasn't part of my contract. And he walked out. And my teenage son said, I'll never forgive you for making me move away from my friends. And I thought, I'm unworthy to teach somebody who's paid that high a price to be at Duke Divinity School. Some of you went to the polls not long ago and you voted for the politicians who promised to get our country back. No, nothing about us is permanent. Robert Herrick was a bon vivant in the taverns of London, but then he became a parish pastor, thus gaining a front row seat on human finitude, leading to his famous, gather ye rosebuds while you may, time is flying. The same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. Nothing about us is built to last. In the end, last Sunday of the year, Jesus' last will and testament, he tells the truth. Precariousness, transitoriness, stone not left upon stone. That's our situation now. But maybe I speak too negatively of our God's endings. In our gospel, Jesus concludes his apocalypse of cataclysmic, terrible destruction by saying, this is the beginning of birth pangs. Can it be that what we call death is, in the hands of God, birth? Only a living God can make the end the beginning. Is today's apocalyptic gospel good news or bad? Well, that may be dependent on where you are when you get the news. I never hear today's gospel without recalling a student mission trip to Honduras. A group of us worked a couple of weeks in an impoverished village, the little village of San Marco, running a makeshift health clinic. And each night we would build a fire and sit around with the villagers. And one night a student had the bright idea that we all ought to go around and share our favorite Bible verse. And that kind of thing is always a threat to Methodists like me who are not that good on the Bible. Well, anyway, somebody mentioned John 3:16. And well, then another, the Lord is my shepherd. And then a Honduran woman said through an interpreter that her favorite was Mark 13. Not one stone left on stone, earthquakes, famine, fire. She said, that passage has always been such a comfort. A comfort? Sounds to me like Jesus on a bad day. Apocalyptic? A comfort? I was talking with that woman, said the nurse sitting next to me. 3 of her 5 children have died of infant malnutrition. When Jesus says to me, well-housed, well-futured, reasonably safe and secure, cared for by the Duke Health Insurance Program, when somebody says to me, hey, God's going to dismantle all of this. God didn't create the present economic, political order. We did. God has no stake in the preservation of your vaunted status quo. Well, when I hear that, I hear bad news. But a woman for whom my comfortable status quo has been hell, maybe she hears Jesus talk of the end and of disruption and death and new birth. Maybe she hears that as gospel. Gibbon called the 410 sack of Rome by the Visigoths the greatest and most awful scene in the history of mankind, blaming the wimp morality of Christians for the fall of the Roman Empire. Gibbon's British imperialism was showing what Gibbon called the worst thing that ever happened in the history of the world. The Visigoths called progress. When I was a bishop, I asked one of my pastors who works with the homeless how in the world she persevered in this shoestring ministry for over 2 decades. She waved her hand over the desolation that is downtown Birmingham, and she explained, I know a secret. All of this, it's transient. Thus, Jesus ends his wild Cormac McCarthy apocalyptic cataclysmic discourse by saying, this end is the beginning. This death is birth. At the end, Jesus lets us in on a secret. World torn apart, the veil in the temple ripped by God, so that a new world might be made available by God. The end of your marriage, your last day at your job, the pink slip they give you at work, the rejection letter from college, the empty nest, the death of your beloved. By God's grace, even these endings may be birth pangs that offer you a new world. It all depends on a God whose eternal love is our only hope. Allow me to define the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, in a couple of sentences. 1, God is going to get what God wants. 2, no matter how much God's got to mess up what you've got in order to give it to you. Hope-filled apocalyptic, promise or dire apocalyptic threat, good news or bad, kind of depends on where you happen to be when you get the news.